And Vice Chair Tonner, it looks like we have a quorum. There are 4 members present.
All right, I see 2 besides myself.
Member Rappholt is on the phone.
Oh, okay, great. All right, are we ready to start then?
We are ready to begin.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the APCD Hearing Board's April 8th meeting. Can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you. Member Powers?
Here.
Member Rappholt? We'll wait a couple of minutes. It looks like we lost Member Rappholt.
You're taking off pretty soon to go to Hawaii, and we're going to take Boston.
Emily, can we move forward with 3 members?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Member Powers has already noted that he is here for the record. Member Smith?
Is here.
Vice Chair Tonner?
Yes.
Chair Rodriguez? I would also like to note for the record that all members are participating via teleconference. As such, all votes will be taken by roll call vote. I'd also like for counsel to please identify yourself for the record.
Emily Helms, Senior Deputy County Counsel, Counsel for the Hearing Board.
Hello, this is Member Rappholt. I inadvertently got cut off.
Thank you, Member Rappholt. We'll note for the record that you're in attendance.
Thank you.
This is Dave Silverstein, counsel for the petitioner.
This is Paula Forbes, counsel to the Air Pollution Control District.
Thank you. Will the Air Pollution Control District please identify yourselves for the record?
This is Mary Mahoney, Civil Actions Investigator for APCD.
This is William Jacks, Acting Chief of Compliance for the district.
Thank you. I would also like to note for the record that we have representatives from the California Air Resources Board on the call, and they would like to also briefly introduce themselves at this time.
Good morning, board members. This is Pippin Brailer. I'm a senior attorney with the California Air Resources Board.
And this is Jeff Lindbergh. I manage the Air District Oversight Program in the California Air Resources Board's Enforcement Division.
Thank you both. At this time, I would like to ask anyone present wishing to speak on behalf of the petitioner or the district to please go ahead and place your video on. If you are on the call, go ahead and unmute yourself if you are calling in so that we can swear you in for testimony. I'd ask that you raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the matter before this hearing board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Vice Chair Tonner, we can now move to the approval of the statement of proceedings and the minutes for
All right.
February 18th meeting.
Well, has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting of February 18th? And are there any corrections or comments, district? Hello, the district? Can you hear me?
No comments to the administrative items for the last hearing.
Okay, anybody on the board?
No. No comments. I move we accept the minutes.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye from Rappold.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and call the roll. Member Powers,
Yes.
Member Rappold,
Yes. Aye.
Member Smith,
Here.
you agree? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And Vice Chair Tonner?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes with those board members who are present voting aye.
Okay, so let's move on to the today's petition number, was it 4516?
Correct.
NAVFAC Southwest Permit Appeal Hearing. Permits number APC 2021, 2020, PTO 003675, 76, and 77 pertaining to the annual engine maintenance requirements and bookkeeping in support of ship repair and maintenance operations located at the Naval Base in Point Loma. So, who are we going to have a petitioner or the appellant speak first, please?
Okay, sir, would you like us to put on our primary case first?
Yes, and then the
Okay.
district will respond is usually the way it
Oh,
normally
okay,
works.
okay.
Just to clarify, we had thought that under Rule 18 of the hearing board procedures that the district would address the board first, but
Oh.
obviously you can determine the order you want to proceed.
Well, if does the board want to hear from the district first or the appellant?
I'd like to hear from the district first. This is Tom Rappold. Yes.
All right, then we'll hear from the
Yeah,
district
this
first.
is Bill Murray. I would like to hear from the district as well first.
Okay, go ahead, district.
Okay, Marvis, if you could please display slide number 1 now. And just to clarify for the board, we have prepared a slideshow to go along with my opening remarks. And if it's okay, we would like to go ahead and have a couple of slides be displayed as I'm speaking to help you all follow along. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Yes,
Okay, all right. Then Marvis, if you would mind displaying slide number 1, please. And thank you, board, for the opportunity to provide an overview. My name is Mary Mahoney, Civil Actions Investigator for APCD. With me here today are Paula Forbes, Senior Deputy County Counsel, Miney Luther, Acting Deputy Director, Mohsen Nazimi, Engineering Chief of Operations, John Anacarico, Senior Engineer, William Jacks, Acting Chief of Compliance, and Jorge Lopez, Supervising Air Quality Inspector. They are here today to support the district's position and answer questions about the history of portables at stationary sources, the engineering process for these permits, and the applicability and enforceability of the challenged permit conditions. Marvis, if you could please display slide number 2 now. We're here today to answer any of the board's inquiries on any topic, but in the interest of being succinct, I intend to focus the discussions on the areas that will factually support the board's decision-making process to grant or deny this permit appeal request by determining whether the permits were properly issued. To that end, I will be primarily providing information to the board to support the fact that the district properly issued the permits based on the district's revised Rule 69.4.1. Rule 69.4.1 is the district's rule pertaining to stationary engines and includes their maintenance and record-keeping requirements. Specifically, this means providing information regarding 5 main points. 1, why these engines cannot operate under portable registrations at these facilities. 2, why Rule 69.4.1 is applicable to the appellant's engines. 3, providing information regarding how the district uses and applies rule definitions appropriately. And 4, providing information regarding how our engineering evaluations were properly conducted. And 5th, providing information regarding how we properly amended Rule 69.4.1. I will also provide the board a timeline history on interactions that relate to the appellant's pertinent claims so that the board can have proper context. Additionally, I would like to speak to the appellant's inaccurate statements alleging a lack of air quality impact. Even though this is not a consideration for a permit appeal, I think it's important to the community and would like to clarify the matter for this reason alone. Marvis, if you could please display slide number 3 now. Despite the varied array of allegations, I would like to respectfully address that the focus of all permit appeals is to determine if the district issued the permits properly. And the scope today is further focused on engine maintenance and record-keeping requirements in the permit conditions. The maintenance requirements include changing the engine's oil once a year or oil testing, inspecting and replacing, if needed, any filters, spark plugs, hoses, and belts. The permit also requires a visual inspection at 6 months or 4,000 hours. Associated records to document the maintenance events are also required by the permit conditions. These are the engine maintenance and record keeping requirements for stationary engines. And the engine maintenance requirements are basic. The issue, though, becomes unnecessarily complicated when the focus turns to arguments that are outside of the board's authority. Marvis, if you could please display slide number 4 now. To be clear, District Rule 69.4.1, the stationary engine rule, does in fact apply to these permits and these engines. The district firmly and unequivocally stands by the fact that the engines in the permits are stationary. They are stationary because the engines cannot be operated under the statewide Portable Equipment Registration Program, or PERP for short, or District Rule 12.1 when operated as part of a stationary source. Simply put, these engines are conducting the work of a stationary source, supporting the primary function of the shipyards at military installations, are not changing location per the district's definition of location, and do not meet the district's definition of portable emission unit. The district has assessed that the circumstances of these engines to be those of stationary engines, and thus requiring that engine maintenance be conducted. And the district has the authority to make such assessments for the district's own portable registration rule, as well as for the state's PERP regulation. The district may determine that a PERP registration is not valid at a particular location if the district determines that their operation is supporting a stationary source. This authority was upheld by a California court in 2011 in the case of Hardesty versus Sacramento Metropolitan AQMD. A PERP engine operating at an open pit mining facility was found to be operating as part of the stationary source, and the court upheld the Air District's authority to determine when a PERP registration is invalid, thus requiring a local permit. Thus, these engines cannot operate under a local district registration for portable equipment because these engines do not meet the definition for being portable emission units. And the appellant's engines under both the local and state portable programs are supporting stationary sources. Therefore, these engines must be permitted as stationary. Also, District Rule 69.4.1 applies to these engines because it relies upon the definitions of portable emission unit from the district's new source review rules. These engines do not meet that definition since they operate as part of a stationary source. Thus, the stationary rule that applies is District Rule 69.4.1. Rule 69.4.1 sets specific maintenance requirements for these engines. Marvis, if you could display slide 5, please. The district's definition of a portable emission unit requires that portable equipment not only be designed as portable, but also that the equipment changes its location. It cannot reside at the same location for 12 consecutive months. The district's definition of location is not the same as the state's definition of location. The reason for this difference is simple. The state is charged with mitigating air pollution from individual emission units, while the district is tasked with emissions from stationary sources. The board is now viewing a diagram that visually illustrates the state's and district's definitions for location. The district's definition of location would have an engine moving around the same stationary source and still being stationary. In other words, it didn't move per district definition, and in this case, these engines are also operating as part of the stationary source, and so fits within the definitions of our stationary engine rule, and conversely, the district's portable engine registration rule will not apply. As I previously noted, because the appellant's engines do not meet the definitions of a portable per district rules, the stationary engine rule 69.4.1 applies. Rule 69.4.1 defines the term engine as being an engine which is not a portable emission unit. Rule 69.4.1 links its definition of a portable emission unit to District Rule 20.1, our general NSR rule. Rule 20.1's definition of a portable emission unit is the same as it is in District Rule 12.1 and requires that an engine change its location as a criterion of portability. Thus, the appellant's engines remain unable to meet the definition of a portable emission unit per district rules, and nevertheless, they're also still operating as part of a stationary source. These facts illustrate the reasons why the appellant's engines are not portable per district rules and why Rule 69.4.1 and its engine maintenance requirements apply. But it's also the case that the district has the autonomy to use our own definitions in our own rules, providing that our rules are equivalent or more stringent to those of state or federal statutes or regulations, which they are. In fact, the appellant submitted permit applications for these engines based on the district's first compliance advisory from 2017 titled Allowable Uses of Portable Equipment Internal Combustion Engines at Boatyards and Shipyards, where it was explained that these shipyard engines require stationary permits. The appellant had also previously obtained other facility-wide permits with the district authorizing their portable coating operations, also occurring as part of their stationary source functions. Marvis, if you could display slide 6, please. The district has a history of requiring portable equipment that supports stationary sources as being stationary and applying our stationary rules and our definitions consistently to the permitting process. The district has issued approximately 100 permits for the engines that were manufactured as portable that reference Rule 69.4.1. Some of these permits date as far back as 2009. Within these 100 permits, 18 are facility-wide permits that alone represent over 200 diesel engines. Additionally, the appellant claims that Rule 69.4.1 had its applicability illegally expanded and that proper rulemaking was not conducted. First, rulemaking was properly noticed, workshopped, and adopted. All requisite analysis was conducted. This is evidenced by the governing board's approval. Appellant did not object to the rulemaking, which occurred while the facility-wide permits were being processed. And appellant, in past communication with the district, had even requested that Rule 69.4.1 be referenced on these permits. There was a direct awareness that both parties, the district and the appellant, had that the engines were not portable. The district's compliance advisories from 2017 and 2020 were sent as outreach for awareness and to remind facilities that their portable equipment registrations are not valid when supporting an integral part of the operation of a stationary source. It is not the case that the rule was being expanded, much less expanded instantly, because the first engine shipyard advisory dates to 2017. The engine compliance advisories were not a substitute to any formal rulemaking process. They were meant to inform stakeholders that their engines were already considered stationary. The district has also applied the same applicability of Rule 69.4.1 consistently over time, including prior to July 8th, 2020, before the engine maintenance in the rule was amended. Again, the district has issued approximately 100 permits for portably designed engines that have permit conditions, including maintenance conditions referencing Rule 69.4.1, going back more than 10 years ago. Evidence that there has been no new expansion of the rule's applicability. Marvis, if you could display slide 7, please. Next, I will discuss the engineering evaluation. A copy was included as Exhibit N in our answer. The engineering staff compared our own district rules as well as state and federal statutes and regulations to the engines based on their intended use and on the pertinent definitions of the respective rule or regulation. The review process found 8 applicable rules and regulations. They are new source review for non-major stationary sources, visible emissions, nuisance, specific air contaminants, toxic air contaminants, NSR, AB 3205, the ATCM for diesel PM from portable engines, and Rule 69.4.1. The timeline and history with the appellant for issuing the permits is as follows. The compliance advisory for engines at shipyards was released in October 2017. Appellant submitted permitting information to the district between October 2018 and May 2020. It took 20 months for all of the information to be submitted. In the middle of 2019, amid the appellant's permitting, draft amendments for Rule 69.4.1 were released for public review and workshopped. There was no opposition to adopting the rule amendment. The district and appellant met in October 2019 to discuss the permits. Appellant's draft startup authorization was sent to them May 11th, 2020. The maintenance condition on the draft startup authorization had the then current Rule 69.4.1's engine maintenance requirements described in the conditions because the new version of the rule with the task-oriented engine maintenance requirements had not yet been formally adopted. About 2 weeks later, at the end of May 2020, appellant requested some changes to the draft conditions for the engine maintenance, but not the maintenance itself. their request was to have the responsibility of maintenance only apply to engine owners, the contractors, but not to engine operators. Rule 69.4.1 applies to engine owners or operators. Also included with the appellant's startup draft review was a request to add Rule 69.4.1 to the condition describing the engine maintenance. At that time, May 2020, Rule 69.4.1 had the same engine maintenance requirements that are in the appellant's proposed condition. So their wording in their proposed condition is from the then current Rule 69.4.1. 2 months later, on July 8th, 2020, the governing board approves the amendment to Rule 69.4.1 with new engine maintenance requirements. Now, engine maintenance is task-oriented and consistent between manufacturers. The applicability of the rule was not expanded. The startup authorizations were issued on October 30th, 2020, and referenced Rule 69.4.1. However, the request to omit the responsibility of the engine operators to conduct maintenance was denied. In November 2020, appellant re-requested that the engine maintenance apply only to engine owners. The request was denied again. In January of this year, the startup authorizations became effective, and appellant discussed with the district the concern that they would be issued a notice of violation if their contractors did not conduct the engine maintenance. In March, the district proposed a draft advisory on how we would enforce applicable maintenance requirements, stating that engine owners are responsible for the maintenance. However, contractors are already subject to Rule 69.4.1, and their risk of getting a notice of violation is unaffected by a change in the permit condition. The facility-wide permits went effective on February 9th, 2021. What we have here is a history that points to the absence of any improper activity, but does show the appellant's concern for the changed engine maintenance requirements and desire to have engine operators not be responsible for engine maintenance. The district's position is simple. Stationary sources can't outsource their responsibilities. Marvis, if you could display slide 8, please. Finally, these engines operate at or near some of our environmental justice communities. Residents that live nearby and within these vulnerable communities experience higher levels of pollution exposure as compared to most other communities in California. The effect of diesel PM, a toxic air contaminant emitted by these engines, can reach deep into the lungs, contributing to heart and lung disease and lung cancer. Diesel PM is estimated to account for approximately 70% of the total known cancer risk in California, making it a significant cancer health risk. The required maintenance can prevent excess emissions that can negatively impact the nearby environmental justice communities. If the board grants the permit appeal, it will circumvent district rules, and approximately 200 diesel engines operating under umbrella permits would be affected. 150 of these engines are located at or near our environmental justice communities that experience higher levels of pollution burden and vulnerability as compared to most other communities in California. The Navy's proposed maintenance condition, which is outside of the board's authority to impose, would result in inconsistent and, in some cases, less stringent maintenance requirements for these engines. I urge the board to deny this permit appeal for all of the aforementioned reasons. I appreciate the board's consideration and attention, and I and other district staff are happy to explain any of these main points in greater detail to the board. Thank you very much.
All right. Are there any questions by the board to the district?
Yes,
Yes.
Member Tomer, this
Yes.
is Member Rappel.
All right, go ahead.
Who's going?
I'm sorry?
this is Tom Rappolt. I can ask the question.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Mary, for that very informative presentation. Even though I can't see it, I heard it, and I've read this 187 pages with regard to the application, to the petition, as well as the response from the district. One question I had was, and I think you answered it, these exact conditions relative to Rule 69.4.1, these exact conditions exist elsewhere in other people's permits at this point?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
We have about 100 permits that have Rule 69.4.1 identified that are also portably designed.
And they read exactly like this?
I believe so. I believe there was an exhibit included with our answer, and it had a listing of permits that had Rule 69.4.1 identified on it.
And I think if I could, John Anacarico is on the line. I think the district is in the process of updating these permits because some of these requirements were just adopted in July of last year. So I'm not sure that all of those 100 would have this exact language, but they are in the process of being updated. So certainly some do in the districts updating those permits at this time. But John may be able to answer more specifically.
Hello, yes, that's exactly right. We do have many permits that already have these exact conditions. In addition, we're updating many more permits that have 69.4.1 applied to portably designed engines, just as these are. So when the rule changes, then after it's changed, then you have to go back and make changes to those permits, some of which have been issued now more than, well, I think back to 2005, I believe, many years.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I yield my time back.
I've got a question.
This is Vilma Marie Rodriguez. I would like to ask a couple of questions.
Yes,
Hello,
go
can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, thank you. I would like to dovetail, on the very same question that Tom Rappolt asked. And for me is, would the district believe, that, again, granting, this permit appeal, would provide an unfair advantage, to the Navy itself?
Well, we have submitted with our answer that list of 100 other similar permits, and 18 of which are facility wide, and these permits have been issued to other companies and other entities besides the military. So there is no singling out of the military in that regard. The requirements are being applied consistently to all parties.
So, I'm going to read definitely that it would be an unfair advantage, because if the other entities are definitely subjecting themselves, to the newly implemented rule, that language, needs to be equivalent distributed, across, for the betterment, of the air quality in the basin. I actually have another question, and does the San Diego Air Pollution District, is the district the only district, with the autonomy to implement stricter standards and rules, than the state?
Paula, do you have a response for Bill Marie on that one?
Sure. No, all districts are similarly situated when it comes to that, to their authority. So the air districts, the local air districts in the state have primary responsibility over stationary sources, and that's given to them under the Health and Safety Code. So the San Diego district is not unique in being able to adopt rules to control emissions from stationary sources. All districts are able to do that. And part of the reasoning behind that, the policy behind that, is that different districts have different air quality challenges. So they need to be able to adopt rules to control emissions from stationary sources. And they certainly have the discretion to do that.
I wanted to ask this question, even though, we are all fairly seasoned in this area, but for the public, who's listening, certainly that is really very critical because, as Paula said, and I would like to emphasize, every single district, it is captured geographically, regionally different, with its own challenges. So definitely we need to be responsive to the challenges, that exist, in San Diego. So thank you, Paula. And my last question, on this one, and Mary, and I know that you do excellent due diligence, it is, what time has it taken the district to implement the new rule? And I would actually say that would be the time, when you engage the public, let's say from the advisories to the time, that it was implemented as a final and effective rule.
Sure. Actually, I think John Anacarico might be the best person to address that question for you, Ville-Marie. John, are you able to talk to the rulemaking timeline?
So we do have a separate group that does the rulemaking, and unfortunately, I don't know exactly how long that whole process takes, and I'd just rather not speculate exactly. Unfortunately, I just don't know the whole timeline of that. It was a lengthy process, and lots of outreach was done. Public workshop was done. So all those requirements that are mandated that we follow, surely they were all done. I just don't know the timeframes.
Yeah, but definitely, John, this is not something, that is done overnight. And we thought, the feedback, from the regulated community and also the community at large. I have been in many of these advisory meetings, and certainly I'd say that unless it is an executive order and an emergency, these mandates take, at least 2 to 3 years. Would that, inference be correct? What I'm saying?
If I could, I'd like to see if the process for the amendments to Rule 69.4.1 was addressed in the district's presentation. And so we have the slide on the chronology. That would be slide 7 from the presentation. And basically, you're correct. These processes often take multiple years. Under the Health and Safety Code, we're required to have public hearings in order to adopt the rules. But prior to that, the district does extensive outreach and workshops, puts out notices to anybody that could potentially be affected, permit holders and the like. And so here, the original workshop for these amendments was in August of 2019. In all likelihood, there was, a lot of outreach that occurred prior to that. And then specifically, the rule was adopted and effective in July of 2020. So at a minimum, there was at least a year, but in all likelihood, it was probably longer than that these requirements were being discussed.
No, thank you, Paula. That I, just like Tom, we are on the phone, we cannot see the presentation. But certainly, I'm speaking also, from experience, and knowing certainly the requirements of the Health and Safety Code and also the way, the district, has approached these things, in the past. Why do I ask this question? Because as a regulated entity, we would actually have time as well, to anticipate, the challenges that we actually have. And to present those, to the district and other boats. I mean, for example, indicating, the unreasonable level of maybe resources utilization to get them into that level of compliance. So we need to certainly anticipate, the impact and communicate that as well. So, at this point in time, I just see it, the time, I'd have no questions at this point. Thank you.
Are there any further questions by the board?
Yes, I have a question. And my question is, can the district's definition of portable engines trump the state's definition of a portable engine?
Well, we do rely primarily on our own definitions. We have definitions for portable equipment registration that where we define what a portable emission unit is, and that's also where we define our definition for location that we do rely upon. From a legal perspective, I do believe that we have the ability to use our own rules and definitions. If I'm wrong about that, Paula, you can chime in and let me know. But I do believe that we have the ability to do that.
We do for the purposes of regulating stationary sources. And so the district has authority, for example, under the portable equipment registration program rule that is a state regulation. The district has the authority to determine when a portable equipment registration is not valid because equipment is operating as if it were a stationary source. So the district has authority, over stationary sources. It's subject to CARB's authority in general, but yes, the district can use its own definitions of portable emission unit for purposes of regulating stationary sources.
And so they can redefine a portable source as a stationary, depending upon district's definition, not the state's definition of portable versus stationary.
That's correct. And so that was the case that Mary Mahoney mentioned, where the court basically upheld local districts' authority to determine what is a stationary source. And it's important under both under the district's authority under state law to regulate stationary sources, as well as its authority under federal law to be able to regulate stationary sources. So the district is absolutely entitled to be able to define that.
Good, thanks.
Are there any other questions?
No questions.
Yes, I had a question. This is Tom Rappold again.
Oh, go ahead.
Paula, just based on what you just said, and I'm not suggesting this, but I'm just curious, if it is the district's rule that determines that a mobile source under the state is now a stationary source under the district rules, then how do variances apply to that? Do you have any wisdom on that?
I guess I'm not quite clear on your question. Are you asking if a source could obtain a variance from a district determination about whether it's a stationary source?
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding it. What I understand is that, from what I'm hearing, is that the district can determine under its own rule whether a source is stationary, and as opposed to a portable unit as defined by a state rule. So if that's the case, can a person ask for a variance? Because variances are only for district rules. Can they ask for a variance on that ruling of a stationary source?
Because stationary source determinations are grounded in the district's authority under federal law, and it has many, it obviously it's hard to do on a hypothetical basis, right? It's hard to kind of answer on a categorical basis. But at the same time, stationary source determinations are grounded in federal law, have many implications for NSR and potentially Title V. So as a result, based on those implications, I would say probably not. But again, it's going to be dependent on, you know, what the actual facts of the circumstances are.
Also,
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point on that in terms of the federal applicability of some of these laws or rules. So yeah, it's just a hypothetical, and I appreciate your time. Somebody else is weighing in.
If I may, I just wanted to chime in that, and maybe it's more a question for Emily, that, you know, again, the focus of this hearing, if the permit was issued properly, you know, I appreciate the questions, but also just hypothetical variances. I don't know if would be a part of this discussion right now. And so I just want to chime in and mention that.
Well, this is Tom Rappold again. I do have a purpose in asking that with regard to, you know, the reasonableness and the adherence to district rules in terms of how the district applied them in this case, and did they do it reasonably? And I think that's the bar we have to get over or not get over in this hearing in terms of understanding, you know, not the details of the rules, but are they applied properly and reasonably? And that's where I'm coming from. But I appreciate the comment, and I agree. I don't want to get, you know, sidetracked into this. I was just curious. All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right. Let's move on to the appellant. If the appellant wishes to address the board now.
Yes, I do. Oops. I'm not very technically savvy though.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, where to begin here? Well, my thanks to the board members for hearing this, and thank you, Mary, for presenting a it's a complicated subject. It is a complicated subject. I appreciate it. And thanks, Marvis, for, you know, your technical know-how making this possible. This is sort of science fictional, you know, doing these things from remote locations like this. I'm in Tillamook, Oregon right now, and God knows where everybody else is. But by presenting, there's a couple of things I'd like to say up front before I go into this. One is this is not an emission issue. We think it's really a maintenance issue in the terms of whether maintenance under the conditions that we've proposed, which do provide for maintenance, the permit conditions we've proposed, and the recourse that the district actually has over portable engines as portable engines, is proper maintenance. And we think it is proper maintenance. And the question of whether these new requirements come in, and the problem with the new requirements isn't necessarily that they're onerous or anything else, it's that they're different. Okay, so it's like if you had it's like you had a rental car, and the rental company was had to keep the car up per manufacturer's recommendations, but local police had a special list of particular conditions, which, though reasonable, might not be the same. They might be different. Okay, and that's the problem here. The other problem is when we talk about past practice, I want the board to be aware that we respect the district a lot. We respect what the district's trying to do. So usually we trust their interpretation of the law and the rules. And frankly, everybody made a mistake here, and we've made a mistake for a long time. We shouldn't be applying these rules to these engines. But when it's our engine rather than a third party engine, I'll get into that. But when we'll accept, if it's an engine that we own, we'll accept harder conditions without questioning them because we have the engine in our control. With these umbrella permits, where we're talking about rental engines brought in by contractors, it's a different matter. That's one thing. And the other thing is these new requirements, these very new requirements from the latest amendment in Rule 69.4.1, these conditions provided this difference which could cause cause an inspector to have a particularized list that won't match the legally mandated maintenance that is done on the engines. And so until somebody was really aggrieved by this, nobody was going to appeal it. The burden is very high. I just wanted to mention that. This is a complicated area, as Mary ably showed us. And I think she's made it easier for us to actually talk about what the difference is between the way the district and the Navy are interpreting these rules. A lot of what we're doing here is talking past each other, okay? The Navy and the district agree that Rule 12.1 requires these engines to be under the umbrella permits. We weren't not thrilled about this, but we applied for the umbrella permits, and we're not appealing the permits themselves. It's a narrow appeal about certain requirements that come from particularized requirements that come from Rule 69.4.1. Okay. We also agree that the engines are regulated under the portable engine ATCM, the air toxic control measures. Okay, we agree on that with the district. And we also agree with the district, at least for purposes of this discussion, that the PERP registrations are void in the sense that these engines can't operate. Mary showed you why, under the district rules, these engines cannot operate under merely PERP registrations. They have to operate under our umbrella permits, okay? So that's where we agree, okay? Where we disagree is very simple, actually. What the district is saying is that these engines have become stationary engines at a stationary source, okay? And there's problems with that. One of the problems they pointed out is that these are designed as portable. They're also engineered as portable and built as portable, okay? They're different. They're different engines, all right? They don't transform into stationary engines. And the other thing is they're double regulating these engines. They're saying these engines are subject to the portable ATCM and the stationary requirements. And to a layman, that looks funny too, because it's like, how can they be portable and stationary at once? It just doesn't seem, it doesn't seem logical to me. And we're also going to talk to you about how it's illegal to do this, because the district has talked to you about its rulemaking, but the point is not that they didn't do their rulemaking right. They did it right. God, there's no question about that. The problem is they left an entire population of engines out of the rule, okay? Out of the rulemaking, okay? So they can't, so the rule is deficient as to these particular engines, which are a different kind of engine, okay? Anyway, let me move on. The district is saying to you that these are stationary engines at a stationary source. What we're trying to say is that these are portable engines that are part of a stationary source. They are portable engines that are part of a stationary source. As such, they should be regulated as portable engines, but the whole thing is subject to new source review and that sort of stuff. And Rule 69.4.1 shouldn't be figuring into this, because it's a stationary source rule, and in the rulemaking there was no notice that this population engine was going to be included. Marvis, could you bring up our proposed conditions, please? I'd like to show you what we're asking for, and I'd like to.
To ensure I bring up the correct file, is this the are these your appendices?
They're not the appendices. They're the first email I sent last night, the first item, which I think says is proposed conditions. I hope I labeled it well. Yeah. Well, anyway,
I'll pull them up in just a minute.
I thank you. I thank you. Anyway, the conditions that I'm going to show you, there are two approaches that we've outlined in our proposed conditions. One approach takes care of the fairness problem that was brought up before. The appeal we're doing now affects the entire regulated community, and we would ask you to remove Rule 69.4.1 from the permit and 63 CFR Part Quad Z as well, and institute a permit condition that just requires the engines to be either registered or under permits of their own to ensure that they would be. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. So we think that the board has the discretion to make a policy choice here, and the policy choice is that the board can fix the whole problem, which is the problem as we see it is an error of the district and of the regulated community, an oversight that has left these engines out of Rule 69.4.1. That as now the district could, the board could fix the entire thing by removing the condition, or if you would scroll down, Marvis, to the bottom, or you could just fix our problem here, which is just these particularized maintenance conditions, and that would be giving us our proposed condition, but also in recognition of the district's argument, making a slight change. The slight change is that the slight change being that we would prefer that the condition be legally anchored in the portable engine ATCM. If you take the second choice, we would also request that you recognize that this is a looser nexus between condition and law than we usually see. However, the petitioner would accept this as compromise. Okay, you can take that down, Marvis. I'm going to talk about how we can I think that this is a simpler problem than what we've set out to look at here. It's not a problem of the whole universe here. Given what the Navy and district agree on, it's simply a problem of where we end up on this. And we think it's more rational to end up saying that these are portable engines that are part of a stationary source. So they are regulated as portable engines. The presentation that we're going to put on right now is going to talk to you about First, we'll have Massey Hatch, our consultant, come on, and we'll talk about the fact that we know of no emission benefits, and we know of no crisis in unmaintained engines either. And then Massey and I will discuss the illegality of the rule as now written. And we'll also talk about the burden of the rule. Paul Clifford will come on and talk to you about the burden of the rule. And the burden is just relevant so that you can have something to compare to the benefit. The benefit, again, is unproven. Massey, there was one other legality I wanted to address. Marvis, could you bring up that last slide that I sent you, the portability definition? At any rate, this was in considering whether that you can change the permit. There is the broader legal argument is that it's illegal to apply the rule. Okay, it's illegal to apply 69.4.1 to portable engines, and it has bad consequences across the entire regulated community, and the entire regulated community is not happy about it, but the Navy is recently aggrieved and is appealing it. You can also look at it as a matter of how the rule is written, even if it were not illegal. The definition of portable in Rule 69.4.1 does not point back to the broad definition that is in Rule 12.1, okay? It points to the new source review rules. Portable is the same as portable in the new source review rules is the same definition as it is in 12.1, except for one detail. There's no definition of location in the new source review rule. So rather than going and shopping back to 12.1 to get a broad definition of source, of location, it's logical just to default to the narrow definition that is in the ATCM. So if we do that, these are portable for just for the narrow purpose of Rule 69.4.1. It doesn't make them not part of the stationary source. It doesn't mean the umbrella permits are not valid. It just means that they're not stationary engines at a stationary source. They are portable engines that are part of a stationary source. You can take that down if you like, Marvis. Thank you. Massey, would you come up here wherever you are? Oh, there you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Morning.
Right. Good morning. Good morning. Could you state your name again and tell us what your relationship is to this matter?
Yes, my name is Massey Sammy Hatch. I'm an air quality consultant, and I have been supporting the and other facilities in San Diego for over 25 years, air quality issues. I've worked with many air district staff, including those who are here, for many years, very collaboratively, and have tremendous respect for air district staff.
Okay, you're starting to break up a little, or maybe it's at my end, Massey. Okay, let's go. Let's talk briefly about the benefit to air quality, if you don't mind, from imposing these conditions.
Sure, I will do that. Let me know with the sound if you can't hear me. This issue before us, not an air quality or air quality issue in the sense of impact to air quality. This is an administrative issue and has to do with applicability of a district rule to the legislation engines.
Massey, I'm afraid you're breaking up. Can everybody hear her?
Not
Can
really.
you give me a thumbs down or thumbs
Well,
up?
I'm gonna have to give you a thumbs down. I'm sorry. Paula's
Okay.
not convinced that she's. Yeah, I see. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna try to disconnect my headphones.
Okay. Now I can't hear you at all. Can't hear you at all, Massey. So much for that.
Chairman Toner, this is Member Rappholt. Now, I understand we're getting into the weeds of the rules and how they apply and the legality of it, but that I feel is not in our jurisdiction. We have a very narrow ruling here in terms of, did the district apply its rules in a reasonable manner? And, you know, whether it's illegal or not, I don't think it's anything that we can rule on. Can you give us some guidance on that? Thank you.
May I also weigh into that then?
Who was that question for? I don't know if he was asking
A member, I
the
believe.
hearing board counsel, or if he was asking.
No, I was asking. This is Member Rappholt. I was asking our chairman, Nick Toner, about, you know, essentially our jurisdiction. What is our jurisdiction here? I think, you know, we can't rule legality of you know, rules and applicability. It's whether the district applied its rules reasonably, and that's all we can do. All right. So that, you know, as far as I understand, and I've been through ARB advanced hearing board training 4 times, and that's what I understand we can do on a permit appeal.
May I? May I weigh into the question?
Well, my question was to the chairman of the board. Thank you.
I understand.
Chairman Toner, I think you were on mute.
Oh.
How's that? Okay. I said I was going to allow some leeway, but you need to focus on whether or not the district's promulgation of the rule was reasonable, and that's what our jurisdiction is to make that determination whether or not it was reasonable.
Could I clarify that a little bit? And then I think David probably wants to address it as well. The issue of the rule adoption is not on the table before this board. So whether the rule itself is reasonable, whether it was properly adopted, those are subjects for a different forum. Those are not subjects for this hearing board today. The sole focus here for the board is whether the rule as it's written was properly applied to these permits. That's the question.
And that's my understanding. This is Member Rappel. Thank you.
That's my understanding.
Okay. May I?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Okay. The legality of the rule is relevant to the question of whether the district was reasonable. If the rule application is illegal, then it follows that the application is unreasonable. So really what we're saying is that it is unreasonable. And I thank you for the question, because it allows us to clarify what we're talking about here. The rule development is relevant because the rule itself does not actually say anything about portable engine regulation. It is a stationary engine rule. And so it has to be, so basically, if you're applying a stationary engine rule to portable engines, that is not reasonable. The district has an argument as to why it is reasonable. Our argument is that it is not reasonable because it does not apply to these type of engines. Even if you apply it through the new source review process, you have to determine whether it applies to this type of engine. What you'll find is that although the district may have discretion to enact maybe any rule it wants, I don't know. I don't know anything about the limits, actually, how far it goes. It goes far, though. But the point is they did not do that here, okay? And that is relevant to whether this rule was reasonably applied. I think it is part of the inquiry, is what I'm saying.
I think, again, the rule was adopted last July. The applicability of the rule was not changed. There were no amendments to the applicability sections. There were no amendments to the definitions that are relevant to this inquiry. There were no challenges to the rule when it was adopted. And so to bring these challenges now in the context of a permit appeal are just simply not appropriately within the scope of the hearing board. And so whether the existing definitions are appropriately applied to these permits is the sole focus of this inquiry, I would argue. And so whether the rule itself was appropriately adopted is not the subject of this inquiry.
But the point is that the rule was appropriately adopted. It was only defective as to this population of engines. And I think that is a reasonable inquiry. It's also reasonable in light of, I think it's a reasonable inquiry.
But none of that has changed as the district has put forward.
That's
this
true,
rule
Paula.
has been, and you acknowledged in your opening comments, this rule has been applied to these types of engines since at least 2009 by the district.
I acknowledge that. Yeah.
There's many permits that it is applied to. So what has changed are the maintenance requirements.
It has been misapplied to this population of engines since 2005. The fact that neither the regulated community nor the district caught it is somewhat embarrassing to all of us. But the fact that it's illegal, we can't waive the illegality of it. We can't rely on past practice to say that it makes it legal now. The point is, it's coming up now because this oversight essentially has brought it up now. I think we're appealing it validly.
You cannot appeal the rule in this setting.
We're not appealing the rule. We're appealing the application of a rule that does not apply to this population of engines because when it was amended, when it was made, and when it was amended, it did not apply to this population of engines. They were left out. There are, in other districts, the rule specifically includes this population of engines. For example, in the South Coast Air Quality Management District, it includes both A and B correspond to stationary and portable engines, and portable engines are treated separately.
Well, and
so that way the community has notice of the proposed rule and its applicability, and they can comment on it, and And frankly, if the district had done this at that time, I don't think this rule would look like this. I think it would look more like the South Coast rule, which does not apply these type of requirements.
Well, other rules in other districts are not relevant to this inquiry and are not appropriately the subject of this inquiry either. So as we talked about in one of the earlier questions, districts can adopt different rules. Absolutely, they have the discretion to do that. And again, this rule, the applicability has not changed. In fact, we can introduce into the record an email showing a request from Ms. Hatch to list Rule 69.4.1 in the permit conditions as a reference in the course of developing these permits. So, this is not something that has been newly applied to the Navy or newly applied to these engines. It's just that once these new requirements came into effect, it seems that the Navy has decided now is the time to change it.
May I? Can you hear me? Am I back?
You are, yes.
Okay. David?
But can I just conclude really quickly, is this is not the appropriate forum to challenge the applicability of Rule 69.4.1 to these engines, because that hasn't changed. The inquiry is, does Rule 69.4.1, was it appropriately and reasonably applied by the district to these permits? That's the inquiry.
And it was not, because these engines are not part of that rule. And that's really what we're saying. We're saying that the district unreasonably applied Rule 69.4.1 to these engines because it applies to stationary engines. And that although Rule 12.1 does require these engines to be governed under an umbrella permit, Rule 69.4.1 does not. Yes, Matthew.
David, yes, I'm sorry, because
ahead.
I don't know, I don't want to lose my audio, but I wanted to just mention that 69.4.1 as written is fine. It's an absolutely solid rule for stationary sources. So what happens is the interpretation and expansion of this rule to portable sources is what the issue is here. There's nothing in the rule that connects the requirements to portable sources. So if what we're talking about is complete agreement with the Air District about the definition of location for permitting purposes. And that's why we're here before you, because we have umbrella permits that the Navy has applied for those umbrella permits. What we're talking about is the definition of location for the purpose of technology-driven rules, such as BARC rules, such as RAC rules, the federal NSPS, federal NESHAP, and the ATCMs. That definition of location it has to be specific in order to take into account the nature of these engines, which is different. They're portable engines. They move from location to location within the facility. So I think what's happening is the district is using the definition of location that's completely appropriate for permitting purposes and is applying it to technology-based rules. And it doesn't need to be that way. For 69.4.1, there's nothing in the rule that connects the requirements to this population of engines. And the district is absolutely correct. This should have been caught back in 2009. We're not disputing that. As an air consultant, I wish I had caught it back in 2009, because the application of this rule to portable engines is incorrect. And it was incorrectly applied since 2009. So it's not a new thing. You're right. The historical data you've shown is absolutely correct. But I don't think an error that was made so many years ago is justification for continuing that and applying it to this population of engines. We're talking about portable engines that are not owned by the permit holder. These are engines that are owned by third-party vendors, and that this population just simply was never included in the analysis for 69.4.1, the initial rule or the amendments. And the problem became noticeable and significant when the district incorporated the NESHAP requirements. These are federal requirements that pertain to stationary engines. When those requirements were incorporated into 69.4.1, then everybody realized the disconnect. Those are requirements that pertain to stationary engines, engines that are fixed to a foundation. Everybody agrees, including the district engineering department, that those federal NESHAP requirements, the federal NESHAP does not apply to portable engines. But somehow this rule amendment incorporated these requirements and extended them to portable engines without going through the right rulemaking process. So it is the application of this rule. This rule does not say in black and white that portable engines are included. There's no reference to location in the rule. There's no reference to Rule 12.1. District is not obligated to have 69.4.1 as an applicable requirement to this population of engines. That's our point. We're completely on board with permit requirements for portable engines that supplement an ongoing activity, that don't leave the facility, stay at the same function for 12 months or more. Our discussion is very narrow. It has to do with the applicability of that definition to this population of engines for technology related purposes. And you don't have to accept our word for it. I mean, look at the NESHAP that EPA has promulgated. Look at the fact that we have a stationary ATCM and a portable ATCM. We have two different set of standards for stationary engines versus portable engines. And look at all the other major air districts in California, how South Coast has handled it. They've actually analyzed portable engines as a population separate from stationary sources for the purpose of their BARC rule. Mojave Desert, they've excluded these portable engines from their BARC rule. And BARC, when I'm talking about BARC is best available retrofit control technology. That is what 69.4.1 is. It's a technology-driven rule. If you look at the other districts, they've handled it in a consistent manner with what we are proposing that the district has to do, that we are proposing that the district would do. And unfortunately, if it would require correcting all those historical permits, we're not asking for something that would give the Navy a disadvantaged benefit by not including those requirements. We're saying an error was made back in 2009, and unfortunately, none of us caught it. We didn't catch it, the district didn't catch it, but let's correct it.
And probably it would have been better for us to do this in an iterative manner, yes. As we've done in the past quite a bit, as we did with the marine coding permits, to sit down and talk about what the law was and what the needs of the district were and what the needs of the Navy, and in this case, the needs of the regulated community. A mistake was made, and it falls on the regulated community as well as the district. And there's probably ways to do it. That the Navy isn't bent on changing everything in one swoop, but perhaps it could be done over time as far as the other permits go.
And David, may I add one other thing?
Yes.
I understand what you described about the scope of the hearing and the authority of the hearing board regarding, rule promulgation. But I think this argument is relevant to what we're trying to say here. There's a very specific procedure that air districts need to follow for developing their BARC rules, including 69.4.1. And that includes looking at specific control technologies. It includes looking at economics related to implementing those technologies. It includes having public participation in developing those requirements. And
Pardon me, Marvis, could you bring up, I believe it's our Appendix G, please, which is the BARC rule that is being talked about.
Right. So the reason I'm bringing this up is the district followed all of those steps for 69.4.1 for stationary sources. There's no dispute. We're on the same page about that. But what we're saying is that the district did not include this population of engines in the analysis, but then later extended the requirements via an advisory. And that is not a correct procedure. And what the problem is that it speaks to the applicability of controls technologies, economic impact on portable engines that move from a site, a location, a building from it within a facility. It's different to say you need to have a permit for this population of engines. We're on the same page about that. But to say that a technology-driven rule applies to these engines without having included stakeholders, such as these rental agencies, who are now all of a sudden are going to be subject to these requirements, that is not consistent with how this rule or the BARC rule should be developed. And
Right.
The district doesn't have
and the
to do
long-term
it.
fix is going to have to
Is over
involve
time.
all of those stakeholders, which weren't included
And
in the
this
original
is not
rulemaking.
right. And this is not in the rule. So the district does not to this rule to the definition of engines. There's nothing in the regulation 12.1. There's no reference to 12. So it's the district not in a position that has to do this. Unstated internet notices. Okay, David, back to you.
Okay. Okay. Matthew has very, very ably explained where we're coming from. You can go ahead and take that down, Marvis. Matthew's very ably explained where we're coming from on this. And essentially, what we're saying is that this rule was misapplied because it doesn't include these engines, but it would be better for us to say that in a context where we can talk about what the best way is to fix it rather than to ask the board to do it. But that's where we are now. Now, if it's okay, we'd like to go through this, our presentation, at least briefly, as Matthew has pretty much explained what we're going to explain. Matthew, what was your involvement in the rulemaking?
I participated in workshops. I viewed the workshop draft rule. I was actually present in person at the workshop.
So I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Paul.
I feel like I have to interject. If we're going to go back through the rulemaking again, the rulemaking itself is not the appropriate inquiry for this board. We've talked about how this rule applies to a whole host of different permits that are not up for discussion here today. The language of the rule itself has been adopted, was not challenged, and the only question today is whether the rule as it's written is properly applied to these permits. So I don't think it's appropriate to go through an entire extensive discussion of the rulemaking process because it is simply not relevant to what we're discussing today.
Well, I think what Massey said, ably explained, is that the rule does not say that it applies to this population of engines.
Well, and we can discuss the legal reasons that it does, because the district has a very different position on that.
I understand that, Paula, but our position is that the rule doesn't include these engines, And the rulemaking is relevant to that, because if the rule didn't include the engines, yet the rulemaking did include these engines, then it would probably be reasonable for you to do this. In addition,
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, go ahead. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
This is Member Rappold again. I think we're getting off and we're getting away from our jurisdiction and where we have what we have the right to rule on. And Mr. Chairman, I think we need to put a time frame on this and then come to a decision.
Yeah, Chair Toner, this is Marie Rodriguez, Member Rodriguez, and I agree with Tom Rappold. I think we need to go back to the gist of the purpose that we actually are here for. It's very limited.
I agree with that. We seem to just be going in circles on this. We understand the appellant's position. I've allowed a lot of latitude, but we just keep going back over the same thing. And that's not the jurisdiction of this board. So can we tailor it and see if we can wrap this up so we can have discussion and then vote on this, please? Yes, go ahead, Marie.
I mean, I would like definitely to have like a summary statement for from both. I mean, the appellant, I guess. I mean, and the district that goes over the steps that we're looking here very discreetly. It's not about rulemaking. It's an application of the existing rule. I mean, from the authority having jurisdiction, which is the San Diego Air Pollution Control District. I would like to see kind of a summary of that so that we come back to where we need to be and then proceed with the meeting.
All right, I think that's well, I would like to, does the appellant have anything else to say under those? If not, would you like to summarize and then have the district summarize? Or would the district like to go first and then the appellant?
I would like to say two things. One is the existing rule is not reasonably applied because it does not include this population of engines.
Heard that.
Okay, and is that true or not? Are portable engines regulated under this rule?
Are you asking?
Well, no, I was just asking that as a rhetorical, as a question for consideration. I would also go back, and if we are confined to talking about the rule, Marvis, if you would bring up that definitional slide again of 12.1 and 69.4.1.
We've seen this.
I know, but I don't. But that is the rule as written. That is not anything to do with. That is not anything to do with the rule making. That is the rule as written. And what the argument that is in this slide is that the definition in 12.1 of what a location is, which is source wide, does not apply to Rule 69.4.1 applicability. Okay, that is the argument, because Rule 12.1 does not mention. Rule 69.4.1 does not mention Rule 12.1 in this context. Rule 69.4.1 has its own definition of portable. It doesn't go back to 12.1. It has its own definition, except there is no definition of location in the NSR rule, which is where it gets its definition. Okay. In that context, it is not logical to go and shop for a definition of location. Rather, both parties agree that the portable ATCM is applicable, and so that definition would apply by default. So for just this narrow purpose, 69.4.1, just for 69.4.1, portable engines that are part of a stationary source are not stationary engines at a stationary source. Just for, and this puts aside, this assumes that the rule is proper in everything. Even if the rule is proper, the application of it to these engines is wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
District, what would you like? Would you like to comment?
Yes. Well, thank you, David and Massey, for your comments.
I would also like to talk about burden, but please go ahead. Please go ahead, Mary.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And Paula for steering the scope of today's hearing in the right direction. There's a lot of ground to cover in some of these comments. And so mine will be a little bit brief, then I'll probably hand off to Paula and some of our other staff that are present today. But essentially the slide that we just saw that Mr. Silverstein had Marviz display for us, all of those definitions and that process that we just witnessed, we would basically come to the opposite conclusion. We feel that the definitions that we applied are accurate and they're correct, and we can explain them. And for example, our rule 12.1 portable equipment registration rule is an important rule for where we qualify or disqualify what is portable and what it would not qualify as portable. The rule itself has a section in it called ineligible equipment or invalid registrations. That part of the rule says to look in the definition of a portable emission unit, not for the word portable as was on the slide, but portable emission unit. And that definition contains the word location within its definition. And location, as my slide showed, we have different definitions of location. Our definition is a stationary source. And Mr. Silverstein had made a comment that we're talking about portable engines at stationary sources. Well, I would say that we're not really talking about portable engines at stationary sources. We're talking about engines that were designed as portable that are doing the work of a stationary source. And so the Navy doesn't own their own engines. And if they had, if they did own their own engines, we wouldn't even be having this discussion today. So we do see this as a stationary source, and we see these engines performing the function of the integral function of the operations of a stationary source. And so that's just a fundamental difference. And then Rule 69.4.1 has a definition in it for stationary engine. If you read that definition, it clearly states a stationary engine is not a portable emission unit. And when you look at the definition of portable emission unit, which is in our NSR rule, you're going to see that anything that doesn't move for more than 12 consecutive months is also not portable, regardless of how it was designed. And that's what's occurring on the Navy bases. And so that's kind of a brief overview that some of our staff might want to expand on in more detail as well. But I wanted to share just a little bit about some of the comments that I had. If Paula or anyone else in our group would like to add on to what I've shared, please feel free.
So I just want to expand a little bit on the definition of location, because I think there's been some discussion of that. And, as Mary said, the definition of portable emission unit that is referenced in Rule 69.4.1 comes from our NSR rule. And that NSR rule, as was correctly noted, does not have a definition of location, but it relies upon the definition of location. There's only one place in district rules that location is defined, and that's in Rule 12.1. And that definition of location is consistent with a stationary source, like the slide that Mary put up earlier. And the reason for that is because if you defined location to be just a footprint of an engine that can move, it would blow an enormous hole in the NSR rule, because then you would not be able to regulate any of these portable engines that move as part of the stationary source. So the fact that 69.4.1 tracks to the NSR rule indicates the district's intent to regulate these engines when they're doing the work of a stationary source, to regulate them as stationary engines. And the district could have chosen to define them in a way that did not make Rule 69.4.1 applicable to these engines, but it didn't. It tracked them to the NSR definition, and that's consistent with the district's role as having primary authority over stationary sources. And so while we can talk about and we can hear about how other districts have handled it or how it's defined at the state, none of that's relevant to the inquiry today. The question is, did the district properly apply its current rule to these engines? And the answer is yes. I mean, it has consistently applied Rule 69.4.1 to these engines since 2009. It's in over 100 permits. It was even, requested to be referenced by the Navy representatives for these particular permits. And so, it really comes back to this very simple question that's in front of the board today: is did the district properly apply the requirements of 69.4.1? Was it a fair and reasonable interpretation to apply it to these permits? And so, we can that's kind of the summary, I think, and other district personnel, if they've got something to add, can certainly jump in. But, that's really the simplest statement, I think, of what the question before the board is today.
I just have to add maybe 2 or 3 sentences very shortly, very short. It's been argued that these are portable engines at a stationary source. I think more importantly, the stationary operation does not exist without these engines. I think that is something to consider. It's not portable as stationary. They are operating as part of the stationary source. That's all I add.
Sir, we do not dispute that they are part of the stationary source, and we believe they should be regulated as part of the stationary source. The only inquiry here is that in the narrow sense, we are saying that Rule 69.4.1 does not apply to these engines if for no other reason that, well, we both agree that the portable ATCM applies. It would seem reasonable to use the definition from the portable ATCM that does apply rather than Rule 12.1, which is not referenced at all in Rule 69.4.1. Now, I would like to put on Paul Clifford to talk to you a little bit about what the burden of this rule is. Paul?
I'm not going to,
go ahead.
I don't think that's within the scope of this hearing, the burden of it. We're looking at the reasonableness of the rule.
Correct. And the application of the rule.
Yes, thank you. So,
okay.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close and discuss this?
I would just summarize that our position here is that there is no emission benefit to this, and that, as we've said, we do not believe the rule applies because it does not include this species of engine. And we also had made the argument that that is supported by the fact that the rulemaking did not mention this species of engine. And we would ask the board to, basically, we believe that the rule was misapplied for those reasons. If you look at the rule, the definition of location from the portable ATCM should apply. If you look at the rule, it also does not mention portable engines. It's a stationary source rule. And
I don't wish to interrupt, but we've gone through this.
Okay. You can that is our position, and
thank you.
You're welcome to ask us any questions that you like.
Thank you. Are there any questions by the board? No?
I have no questions.
No. All right. Discussion? By the
I'm ready
board?
to,
Go ahead.
So Nick, are we going to be closing, the public statements or anything like that, or and then discuss, the board?
Yes, let's do it that way then. Shall we close the hearing?
May they be, the people of the public either in support or against, this permit appeal request?
Are there any members that would like to speak? I don't see them on the clerk.
We did have one member of the public that requested to speak. I don't see them on the call right now, but I would ask that if there are members of the public that wish to speak under public testimony on this item to go ahead and unmute yourself now to do so.
Yeah, I'm here, Jose Franco Garcia.
Please proceed, Mr. Garcia.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, board members and staff. My name is Jose Franco Garcia. I'm the policy director with Environmental Health Coalition. We appreciate the opportunity to comment on the Navy's petition to the board. EHC has reviewed the permit, the petition, and the district's response. We request at this time that the hearing board deny the Navy's petition. It require compliance with the PTO as it issued back on February 9th. We have a couple of reasons here to state for that. Environmental justice and disadvantaged communities are already significantly impacted. The PTO applies to diesel engines, 75% of which are operating on Naval Base San Diego, adjacent to the portside communities of Barrio Logan and West National City. These communities have for years and continue to suffer the most impacted air pollution in the entire region. These communities also have some of the highest levels of diesel particulate pollution in the state. COVID-19 has provided horrifying confirmation that communities with serious air pollution are more susceptible to infection and death. A recent Harvard study found that residents of areas with higher particulate pollution of just 1 microgram per cubic meter are 8% more likely to die from COVID-19 than residents of even slightly less polluted areas. Also, the Navy should accept responsibility for the impacts of their operations. These engines are an integral part of the Navy shipyard operations. They rely on them to perform even the most routine work. The petition presents a hollow argument that these devices are someone else's problem, when in fact the Navy could not operate the shipyard without them. Emissions of diesel particulate pollution are damaging to public health, whether it comes from portable or stationary engine. So we argue both should be regulated. The PTO requirements are very minimal. The Navy has already received maximum flexibility under the umbrella permit. EHC would even question as it may allow emissions of more pollution than necessary. We would argue the PTO should probably be more stringent as it allows for an unlimited number of different engines to operate on the shipyard. The requirements being challenged are very basic, like those that a car owner would be asked to perform for their car running cleanly. EHC has worked alongside residents of these communities for decades, demanding a reduction in air pollution. These residents have shown a commitment to work with APCD on the AB 617 project to develop strategies to reduce air pollution. The Navy is part of that project as well, but their commitment to emission reduction and environmental justice must be questioned at this time as we witness this appeal of minimal permit conditions. Requiring the Navy to maintain the equipment they rely on to conduct their operations, even their basic level operations, is a reasonable expectation by community members. As a good neighbor, we would expect the Navy to be proposing to transition to engines of zero emissions, which would alleviate the need to regulate them. For these reasons, on behalf of Barrio Logan, especially the children of Barrio Logan, EHC requests that the APCD hearing board deny the petitioner's appeal at this time and require compliance with the duly issued permit and its conditions. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Are there any other members of the public? No? All right, then let's close this hearing and move to discussion. And so there we go. Anybody on the board want to say something?
I'm ready to vote.
Yeah, Nick, this is Tom Rappold again. I just wanted to say that, all the parties here have made very compelling arguments and very, interesting positions. But, the powers of this board are very limited, and we are only obligated and we are only empowered to judge essentially on how the district applied its rules and did it do it reasonably. And in my opinion, we have a rule that has been applied consistently to multiple applicants for over a decade, and there's no change here in this application. So it would be my position to deny the petition.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, Tom. Bill, Marie, do you have anything to
Yeah.
add?
Oh, you know, I always have something to say, so, I mean, certainly, I mean, you heard my line of questioning earlier, I mean, to the district, particularly, and we need to understand as a community, not only, the community at large, but also the regulated community. I mean, the aspects of, equivalent, I mean, and fair application of the existing rules. I mean, this is the authority having jurisdiction, and I know that we can do a lot of benchmarking and trying to leverage other areas. But what we have today is about one of the most limited conditions that we have as a board, which is, has the district applied its rule, I mean, that fairly, and then and across the board reasonably, so that in the permits to operate that were issued, I mean, in this case, not to the Navy. And I believe that what we have today and what has been presented by both petitioner and the district, that rule were properly applied. So, I mean, that certainly we do have an issue. I mean, that since has been, I guess, I mean, that been applied consistently across the board since about 2009. So, I would definitely vote, I mean, to deny the petition, I mean, for the applicant here, but definitely encourage the, continued engagement and communication. I mean, that to refine, I mean, that would it be by interpretation, I mean, which is law binding rather than an advisory, by, eventual route modifications, that type of questioning. I represent, I mean, on the board, I mean, the public, I mean, for District 1. Okay, and as I have mentioned before, certainly that it is my purpose, I mean, sitting in this board. So therefore, I mean, I hear certainly the public's, I mean, the claim and to protect, I mean, those other, I mean, sites. I am engaged, I mean, and happy to know that the Navy has been, I mean, a member of 617, as well, I mean, as the EHC. This is how we actually make impact locally, folks. I mean, so please don't come biased. We are not going to be biased when we sit at the table, because what we actually want to do is to make sure that what we actually do is the best, I mean, for the residents across the board of San Diego County. I mean, that's so that businesses stay here with a clean environment also here. That's what we need. Okay, so I mean, but my position is not to deny, I mean, this permit appeal.
Thank you, Ville-Marie. Member Smith, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I've taken care of kids from Logan Heights Clinic for 2 decades in the 80s and the 90s, and they can be adversely affected if there is an excess amount of pollutants coming off the equipment that the Navy has. I think it needs to be regulated. I don't see any misapplication of the rule that the board has done. So my recommendation would be to deny the petition as well.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I think the district seems to have acted within its discretion. It seemed to have followed all the necessary procedures. And I find that the rule is fair and reasonable under the discretion of the district. And so, is there a motion?
I'd like to move that we deny the petition.
Second?
I second.
I'll second.
I second.
A second.
All right. Does the clerk wish to take roll call? And
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. Member Powers,
I would vote to deny the Navy's request.
Member Rappold,
I would vote to deny.
Member Smith,
Deny.
Chair Rodriguez,
Deny.
Vice Chair Tonner.
Deny.
Thank you. That motion passes with all board members being present and voting aye.
Thank you. I think that concludes the meeting unless, again, is there anybody in the public that wishes to speak before we close this meeting?
There are no public members on the call.
Okay, thank you. Then I would move to adjourn and thank everybody for their time and their patience.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.